Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion for International Women in Engineering Day. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Amira Damji. I am a structural engineer and I design buildings, all types of buildings, housing, offices, communal spaces, sculptures, cinemas, and I've had the privilege throughout my career of being able to go around those completed designs and see the local communities being able to engage with them and enjoy them. And what I decided to do last year was set up additive sustainability, where we design buildings focusing on low embodied carbon materials, and local skills. But we also believe in investing in a safe and resilient future for all people. And so what that looks like is not only buildings that are adapted to heat and that are resilient. You can tell we have very poor building stock at the moment that really needs an upgrade to deal with the heat, like what we're enduring this summer. But it also means investing and platforming the voices that represent our communities and spaces, which is why we are hosting this event today. So please do check us out on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. We'll be doing a lot more this year, and we look forward to seeing you there. For me, International Women in Engineering Day is a very important spotlight, and I wanted to take this opportunity to platform women's voices from Black and minority ethnic communities in a UK context, which are perspectives that, from where I'm sitting, are not very visible. And the UK context is really important because from a global setting, we are not actually ethnic minorities. Sometimes when I speak on a panel and I'm the only person that identifies as an ethnic minority, it feels like my words are being taken to represent the opinions of people who identify similarly to me. And so what I like to do is bring together people across multiple intersections of society to platform their individual viewpoints and life experiences and personalities. Further, I think this type of work and discussion on diversity and equity is often unpaid, and what that does is further increase the pay gaps that we see in our industry. A huge thank you to our panellists Zainab and Aisha for their time today to discuss their careers in engineering. I'm going to introduce you really quickly one by one, starting with Zainab. Hello Zainab, welcome, thank you for coming.
Hello.
Zainab Otten is a software engineer at Funding Circle, having initially read maths and physics at the University of Southampton and then completing a master's degree in advanced mechanical engineering and mechatronics. She then started her career as a DevOps engineer. Navigating the transition between DevOps engineering and software engineering, which she later transitioned to, was a really good way to showcase how she could adapt her skills, learn something new, and transition into a career that more suited what she enjoyed. Alongside that, Zainab has accomplished so much more, performing with the Brixton Community Choir, performing in local theatre, and performing her own music. Zainab has also organised so much for the community, including fundraisers, and this year I was delighted to attend her fundraiser for the Black Swimming Association. And welcome Aisha, thank you for being here.
Hello.
Aisha Mahmood is a systems engineer with over a decade of experience in the medical device industry. She began her career as a test engineer on neonatal devices supporting clinical trials and has since worked across product development, quality and compliance, and software engineering. She now works in operations within Electa's service organisation, supporting field teams to run systems effectively and enable reliable service delivery. The systems she supports underpin telematics capabilities, which help drive proactive and preventative maintenance of cancer treatment machines. Aisha is a chartered engineer with the IET, a recipient of the IMechE Young Engineer Award, and has been nominated for the AFBE Young BME Engineer of the Year 2025. She also co-published research on vacuum heat treatment of titanium porous structures and additive manufacturing in 2021. Hope I got that right, and co-founded Electa's Next Gen initiative, growing from 3 to 100 members. Thank you, Zainab and Aisha, for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear about your experiences working as engineers. In engineering, there's a lot of focus on representation when we talk about women. How important is representation to you?
So I think representation is definitely a nice thing. It's a good thing, but it's not the be all and end all. I think just because people are present doesn't necessarily mean that they have the power to actually action change so that things are inclusive for everybody and anybody that's within an institution. Um, so I think it can't be the end goal.
I think for me, representation feels a bit tokenistic. Um, I've been at many companies, and every International Women in Engineering Day, the same people get rolled out for that 1 week, and been told about all the good things that they do. But for me, I'm like, what about the other 51 weeks that I'm working and I'm doing good work? And why is it the same people? It just feels like I don't need to be represented here. I'm here. Don't represent me. I'm here. But give me opportunities, give me sponsorship, give me leadership. Let me build here. I think as a young girl, representation mattered to me because all the women I saw were housewives. And there's nothing wrong with being a housewife, but they weren't engineers. I didn't see myself there. But for me now, I'm here, and girls behind me will see me here. But I need to be able to stay in this space. I need this space to work for me. I don't want to be pushing a big boulder uphill just to be around. So representation is great, but like you said, it's not the be all or end all. It's step one of a very long process.
Thank you to both of you. That summary of representation not being the be all and end all is something that I've really felt a lot in my career. I think that having women in spaces doesn't necessarily do anything for inclusion, like you said, Zainab, unless they are actively like pulling you with them. And anyone is in a position to give women the right career opportunities, the promotions that they deserve, and mentoring them and bringing them up to, you know, the pay that they deserve as well. And I've heard a lot the discourse around women in engineering saying you can't be it if you can't see it. But at the same time, if we take an example like Aisha, she was the first woman engineer in her family. Does that mean that because she wasn't represented there, that was something she was unable to overcome? No. So I think that framing it in that way and relying on representation is not, it's an easy way out, basically, I think, for the industry. But what I also think is it is additionally easy because women and women of colour are especially required to do all this extra work without being paid for it. So I think the burden of that statement and whose responsibility it falls on is also really interesting. So the next question I wanted to ask is about policy. So in discussions like these, International Women in Engineering Day, when we look at steps to move forward, a lot of people talk about improved maternity policy or parental leave, and they also talk about flexible working. And flexible working is really interesting because people can be responsible for care, and that's not gender specific. You know, there are lots of reasons why people may want a flexible working environment. But I wanted to ask you both, how important are these aspects for you, and what else needs to be included when we talk about how we're going to improve things for women in the engineering sector?
So those policies are necessary, but they're not sufficient. On their own, they don't fix the deeper structural and cultural barriers. I think parental leave is critical. It's really important because it impacts women, but it also impacts men. And the burden or the kind of expectation of child rearing is on women. And by having a parental leave, you kind of allow it that both parents could take it. And there's a guy that I follow on LinkedIn, Elliot Ray, who's talking about parenting out loud and about dads being vocal about their parenting, which is really good. For me personally, parental leave isn't in my future, but flexible working as someone with a chronic illness has more of an impact. And I think it means we're more human, we're more flexible. It allows us to work depending on our needs, not based on this 9 to 5 kind of agenda that was given. I'm currently reading like Invisible Women by Caroline, and I have to keep putting it down because it really frustrates me sometimes. But the world was not designed for women, and it wasn't designed for many people of color either. And I think the flexible working allows us to be human. It allows us to determine what we can deliver on our needs. You take a woman's cycle, for example. There are some times where she feels like Superwoman, and other times where it's like a struggle to get out of bed. The ability to be flexible around what you need and not just focusing on that one aspect of a woman's life. I think maternity, parental leave, and flexible working are absolutely essential. They set the foundation, but I think they're the bare minimum. We need to mainly address all the aspects of a life. We need to think broadly, think about women's health. You know, there was companies that are giving like menstruation days away because endometriosis is growing and it's becoming an epidemic across the globe. And women are suffering monthly in quiet and behind closed doors. You've got chronic illness, you've got religious inclusion, psychological safety. Having policies is one thing, but if people don't feel that they can use them or they feel they need to compensate for using them and they don't feel safe, then it means nothing. I think the shift needs to be from offering different policies to creating environments where people can actually use them without penalty. Someone can go pray there 5 times a day without thinking, oh, I now have to work to make this up. Whereas if someone took a smoking break, no one would bat an eyelid, or a long coffee break. I think policies are just the start and they are just the tip of the iceberg. But flexibility and being human is what should be essential to all these policies.
Yeah, no, I literally agree with everything Aisha's saying. Like there were so many things that you raised that I was literally thinking about as well. Um, and it's funny that you mention kind of flexibility being important, especially as someone with a chronic illness. I've been, I guess, fortunate enough to be like relatively able-bodied my entire life until very recently, where I suffered an Achilles rupture, and very unexpected, but it meant that I couldn't walk for like properly for at least 3 months, unfortunately, because of waiting to have surgery and then having to recover from surgery. Um, and I do think that I felt very fortunate that I had a enough support through like a return to work policy and like illness policy and even private healthcare, which we can debate, but it was something that helped, that enabled me to get support that I couldn't actually unfortunately get through the NHS, but also due to just the stress of going through a traumatic process and surgery and having to find out and understand exactly what the correct treatment was for me. If it wasn't for, I guess, the flexibility of my manager and understanding, I could have had an even worse time just getting the care that I needed. I think we spend most of our time at work, and there's this expectation to make work your life, but not bring yourself to work. But sometimes, things like happen, unexpected injuries, unexpected illness, bereavement, as well as being a parent. And again, as women, um, things like menstrual leave are something that it is important, and it's something that should come into this day and age. Um, I think things that make things that make it difficult to be a woman in engineering is possibly not being able to be as open about whether you're struggling, whether you're in pain, and stuff like menstrual leave can allow us like the privacy and time to recover so that we're able to do our best when we're at work. And again, the same thing I can say with having illness leave. I was able to take the time to actually recover so that I could come to work. And I think it was a good example of my manager implementing this return to work in a way that I was able to ease myself in, um, which helped with my anxiety about, feeling like I've lost work or lost time. I think that is just something, I guess, to add, because I think Aisha more or less said everything that I wanted to. I think also as well, actually, that something that's come to mind is policy areas that I think will enable it to be more inclusive for women and for people of any kind of minority is things like pay transparency and promotion transparency. Um, I've found myself, I was quite proud of myself in my current role when I was able to have negotiated a higher salary than I expected, only to find out eventually, like 2 or 3 years later, no, let's say like almost 2 years later, speaking to my not to my senior colleagues, my fellow colleagues who were exactly the same job, exactly the same role, who were able to have actually negotiated like signing on bonuses, and then speaking to more like different colleagues that you just figure out and learn that the pay discrepancies are insane and they're unfair. things like pay transparency and promotion transparency, so people can understand what it actually takes to get to the next level and why, it ensures that institutions and companies are being held accountable, so that and doing so in like if it's transparent, it's public, there's less opportunity for people to be, I guess, favored with, like, there needs to be reasoning as to why someone's progressed. And so I think these kind of policies can also benefit women and minorities in general and make things actually more equitable for everybody.
You talk about pay transparency and promotion transparency, and I completely agree with you. The thing about talking about pay, it almost feels like if you talk about it and someone's going to take that pay away from you, no one can give you a pay downgrade, really. And I think more people need to talk about pay, but it's this cultural shift, and you don't know until you find out. But then when you find out, what can you do about it? Because talking about it is so taboo. But you talk about kind of promotional transparency. I was once in a situation where I was in a team, everyone had the same title, and there was a promotion for a certain person in that team. And I was working with someone, and I accidentally saw that there was someone kind of posed for this thing. This promotion was happening just to promote this one particular person. And I was like, okay, fair enough. This person does deserve it, and if that's how you have to play the corporate game to get them promoted, fine. But what really annoyed me was when, through fairness, they've got to make it public and have it open. You can't just promote someone thing. I was told, why don't you apply for this role? And I was encouraged to apply for it. And I was given this false hope for a role that I was never destined to get. It was not meant for me, so then to spend that energy to go through that interview process, that anxiety, that worry, that kind of preparation outside of my day-to-day role for something that was never meant for me in the first place, and I had 0% chance of doing it. But had I not applied for it, it would have been seen as I don't want to get promoted, so the next time it happens, well, Aisha wasn't interested that time, so most likely she's not going to be interested this time. But I flat out asked, is this role for this person? And they were like, no, 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 of course not. But I had seen that this was specifically for this person. And I think for me, promotional transparency is really important because fair enough, you won't get that promotion, but how do you know how to build yourself to be able to get that promotion? And I'm very fortunate to work with managers where I now say it like, what does promotion look like? What do I need to do? Like, give me smart goals to get there, because you can't tell me that XYZ is getting promoted for XYZ. I'm going to tell you this is where I want to be promoted. This is what I see. How do I get there? What is that gap? And be able to record it to say, actually, you said I need to do this. I've done this. How are we filling that gap in? And the other point I wanted to make was, you mentioned private healthcare, and I unfortunately have spent a lot of time in the healthcare, both public and private. And one thing that I found, unfortunately, in the public healthcare space was when I went with my husband, the doctor didn't even talk to me about my issue. He would refer to my husband. So you've got a patient bed, I'm sitting on the patient bed, my husband's like by the door, just there because he's come with me. And the doctor turns away from me and speaks to my husband about my symptoms. And that entire experience for me was one of the reasons I went private. And I felt like I was being heard. But I was paying for this service, I was paying to have a voice. And what really, really irked me was the fact that when I wasn't paying, I was seen as the property of my husband who should know about me. And I'm very grateful that he is a secret feminist because he was like, I'm not the patient here, you need to speak to her. But it was that kind of day-to-day battle that we deal with as being from either minority ethnic, like female, disability, these constant tiny microaggressions and problems that you deal with, they take up energy, they take up space. You know, if you speak to mothers, they will be like, before they got into work, they were doing their kids' lunches, they was dropping the kids off. They did like a whole job before they started their 9 o'clock job. They're tired. Like, give them some breathing room. And I think that's kind of around policy is it's a start, but you need to think of people as humans. And I'm really grateful, glad that your manager, Zainab, was able to give you that flexibility and that time to let you heal so that you could return to be your best.
Yeah, no, 100%. It was just good to have the policy in place, but then have it implemented well, so I didn't have to feel guilty about being injured and I could focus on recovery. It was good.
It's interesting you talk about guilt because when I had to take time off for sick leave, my dads and both my parents, they were born elsewhere and they came to the UK when they were younger. But my dad, when I took sick leave, kept pushing me to go back to work. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm still not well. I've been signed off by a medical professional for another month. Why are you pushing me to go back? And it was this perception he had that if you take off too much sick leave, they're going to view you as incompetent and therefore they're going to, you know, let go of you or you're going to be in trouble. And it was this fear that he had that he projected upon me. And I was really fortunate in my workplace that they are very flexible. My manager's very flexible. But I think also a lot of that fear and anxiety comes from the people around us and like our parents, and they often project their anxieties onto you. So I think that's an interesting point you make about flexibility. But where does that pressure come from? Is it from your manager, or if it's not from your manager, is it from elsewhere?
I really appreciate all those perspectives that you both have jointly brought together, and I'm so happy that Zainab, that you've had good experiences with regards to transition back into work, and you know it's terrible to hear, Aisha, that you've had some negative experiences even within a healthcare space. You know that's like what you've devoted your career to as well. And it was interesting, Zainab, when you spoke about pay transparency, because when luckily in a company I worked at, I had an ally. So she had a different director to me. Every time we had a pay discussion, we told each other what that pay was and what grade we were going to be promoted to and when. So we were able to match each other. And that was open. We were able to discuss it at any point, and it was a very easy conversation to have. When I tried to have that conversation with a man who was at the same grade as me or had a similar experience, it felt like there was just a culture of we don't talk about this. But amongst women, we do talk about this because it's important. This cultural norm is like actually influencing and perpetuating a gender pay gap.
It was only when I had a female engineering lead who, without any kind of me raising anything, was like, you're getting underpaid compared to the industry standard. I'm going to raise your pay. And I managed to get a pay rise without having to ask for it. And that really opened my eyes to say, actually, good work is not going to show your value. And ever since then, I've always spoken about negotiating and always asking for more. And it's a joke, but in terms of, I put a mentality of what would a straight white man ask for? Because what is anyone going to say? They're going to say no, right? But if I don't ask, I'm never going to get. And I found that when I'm doing negotiations of anything, even whether it's a market in Marrakesh or if it's with pay, always give an unreasonable ask because then they'll meet somewhere in the middle. And that really changed my perception. But it took someone else coming in and telling me that you're being paid unfairly for me to then realize. And I hate to think how many women or how many people are out there who are from a minority background who aren't aware and won't have that ally to come in and tell them that actually you're being treated unfairly because I can see stuff that you don't have visibility to.
I wonder if there's a solution where, you know, some organization can publish like rates that people should be expected to be paid at.
I think like a lot of companies, if they're over a certain size, they have to report their pay disparity between genders. And it's like available for a government website. That information's there, but what are people doing about it? And I think for me, it's like, yes, I can see that information. Yes, I can see that you have more lower paid women than you have higher paid women. I can see this disparity. But what I want to know is what are you doing about it? What is being done about it? We have the data. Now let's use the data to fix it. I work in data. That data is used to fix the machines. Use that data to fix the system.
Yeah, I don't ever see really action on gender pay gap data, or at least when it's published, I don't see a little paragraph saying, here's the pay gap, this is what we did about it. Okay, so to both, how have you experienced the corporate expectation to lead in diversity and inclusion work, and have you enjoyed the experience?
This is definitely a bit of a mixed bag because I think if I compare myself when I first entered corporate world after university. Within my first year, I got really, really involved in loads of the employee resource groups. I was in a huge consultancy firm, like International, and it made going into work like still being at uni but being paid with all of the like it felt like be going to society groups, and in a similar way, like when you're in uni and you know, maybe you join a committee or president for this thing and then you can be secretary for this thing. It's kind of that same format that you have in a corporate space. Um, and I was lucky enough to actually help plan, well, I was part of the team that helped set up the Black History Month event in 2019 for like whilst I was at Accenture basically, and we were able to, you know, partner with getting like a caller to speak to us. We were in this like beautiful space and we threw ourselves a party with and invited not only I mean it wasn't necessarily for Black people of like African and Caribbean descent, but it was open to anyone who was an ally in the company eventually like a certain part of the day, and also other like Black corporate, basically Black people in corporate other companies. So it was a really great networking opportunity to come together, but then also invite people into the space to like, you know, be educated and celebrate the month with us. But I remember how exhausting it was to do your job, sometimes 9, 10 hour days, whilst also trying to upskill, while also trying to contribute to basically helping make the culture at the company great. And it definitely led me to burnout and into a space where I went from being very well known in the company for being someone who works in D&I and not only doing stuff in like the African Caribbean network, but you know, I remember going to events there. Well, even at parts of the Black History Month, we collaborated with the Muslim Interest Group and then the Asia South Pacific network, collaborating with the LGBT network, and then seeing my friends on panels. And it was just such a nice like interjection of different networks. It really did feel like that kind of vibe of being at university, but everyone's putting in like almost a double shift, having to do 2 jobs, which can then lead to burnout. Even at Black History Month, it felt like this is like kind of a lot, but we had, and this is at least my previous company, the leaders of the AACN ended up, I think, doing work behind the scenes with the Julie Sweet, who is still the CEO of Accenture. So imagine you're like a UK section of the Afro-Caribbean network and the entire, like the actual CEO with like 800,000 people is coming in. Like the leads, I have to give my hats to them because they did an amazing job at creating an environment. But I can only imagine from the outside how exhausting it was because they were very high achievers in their roles. Consulting is not easy. Like you will be worked to the bone. But then on top of that, they were doing such work that was so visible that it caught the attention of of a CEO of a multinational company that's been around for like, I don't even know, more than 50 years. On paper it's cool, but I think in reality it can lead to burnout, and it just goes to think like, especially in this day and age where there have been cuts to I guess we're in a post BLM era. It's not cool to be woke anymore. And there's even more reduced funding and action to make spaces as like more inclusive. So there's even less budget to do that. I think you can create really like inclusive spaces and it can be really nice, but I think the toll of the work can really add as a burden without much benefit. It doesn't guarantee promotion. It doesn't guarantee extra pay. You're not being paid for the extra work. You're still expected to do your day-to-day job. So is it really fair on people that are affected by the institution to do work to improve the institution for free? This work should be lying with people that are actually paid to do it. But what we've seen in the last 3 years is the people that are supposed to be doing this work being made redundant. So there seems to be a clear signal that this isn't work worth having budget for. And I think that's a shame.
Can I ask a very quick question on that? With the diversity and inclusion work, are you given a brief or do you have to even start from the beginning, like what the idea even is? Like, do they give you any help, or they're just like, oh, you know, you're this identity, figure out something that works for these people?
I think it is grassroots led. So it is made by, I think it can be a mixture, right? Um, I've not always been close to people that are like initiating stuff across the two businesses that I've worked at and my current job. But I think I think certain initiatives can come as a result of people talking to someone. Maybe they have a good sponsor relationship with senior leadership and suggesting that actually, um, this is the issue, and then it's put on the, like, maybe there's a suggestion from leadership that we could do this idea. Maybe they've come up with the idea, but then they'll ask someone who is more affected to actually like deliver it. I think you could argue in a wider context, people that are now the initiators and, maybe leads and heads of the committees will then now kind of crowdsource volunteering from within the business with this idea that, it can help your promotion case and all of this. Is anyone open to doing that? So then you're getting work delegated and ideas delegated by people that are still not quite the institution, but they're in this weird space of having good rapport with people that are of like higher seniority. So yeah, it's not even necessarily like, I think a lot of the time it is people coming up with ideas themselves. And just, if anything, at the very least, maybe you get budget from leadership or sponsorship so that people are more likely to actually attend certain stuff.
So I have been chair of two grassroots diversity inclusion works. One was a general group called Diversity Inclusion, which was all encompassing for everyone. And one was Next Gen, which is for early careers. So it wasn't age related. It was just if you're early in your career, whether it's your first career, second or third career, it's a safe space where we can kind of talk about ideas. And Next Gen came out because it was three of us talking about how we don't feel like there's a lot of support for early careers. We kind of feel like I've came into the company and found someone else who was roughly my age, and I was like, oh, I'm sticking with you, kind of thing. And I came from, my first ever corporate experience was at Dyson, which really funded a lot of money into their early careers and really created a brilliant graduate track for them. So both my experiences come out from really grassroots initiatives that stem from, we're feeling something and we want to kind of make a difference. But I also found that when leading these employee resource groups, that whenever you raise an issue like retention of women, it very quickly became your responsibility to solve it. The people who were feeling the pain were then responsible for fixing it. And working in the healthcare, I always have healthcare kind of synonyms, but like, you don't go and break your leg and then expect yourself to fix it. You go to someone who knows how to fix it, like a doctor. And I find that the people who are responsible to solve it, they don't have authority. They definitely don't have budget. And all the grassroots I led with didn't have budget. We had to make business cases for cakes or something to show that, yeah, can we get something. They also didn't have any organizational backing. So to actually implement any change wasn't available. And Zainab, you mentioned about having two jobs and burnout, and it is unpaid labor. There is no remuneration. I had jokes being made about, oh yeah, you kind of spend more time doing diversity inclusion than your own job. I was doing my job and I was staying late and doing lunchtimes to do the diversity inclusion work. The whole time I was doing diversity inclusion, my success criteria for my job did not drop. My performance was very high. So I was doing two jobs, and that burnout is very much a thing. I wasn't alone in this. There was a group of us, mostly all women, all ethnic minority women, and people were not known for being lawyers or being engineers or being brilliant in marketing. They were known for being D&I, and it also caused a frustration because it was like, I'm really good at my job. Know me for my job. I do this for other reasons. And there was that kind of almost frustration that I'm not just D&I, I'm not just this token person. This is something I care about and passionate about, but I'm here because I have this other job that I actually get paid to do. which was really interesting. And it's something that we found across some of the people that were working in D&I. But working in these employee resource groups without without that authority, without that budget, without that organizational backing, it almost felt like pushing water uphill with a sieve. There was a lot of conversation, there was a lot of intent, there was a lot of support, but there wasn't very much action. We weren't given funding, we weren't given clear sponsorship. There wasn't a mechanism to turn all the brilliant ideas that we found into outcomes, and burnout was high, and the team dwindled to smaller and smaller and smaller. We had a point where the company hired a dedicated D&I lead, which felt like progress, and we were waiting for that progress. But when the business direction shifted, that was the first thing that got deprioritized. And it goes on to a point that Zainab said, where D&I is one of the first things that get deprioritized. So was it really a priority in the first place? So it made me come away from the experience that organizations sometimes respond to the pressure by creating the appearance of commitment, but they don't always back it up with the power or resources to make actual change, an actual tangible, long-lasting change. I think it's a broader issue, and we often place the responsibility of fixing systemic problems on the very people that are most affected by them, and without giving them that authority to change the system themselves. It's like, we'll give you a voice, but you can't do anything about it. I might as well just write everything down in a notebook and burn it, sort of thing. What's the point? What is the point of all that energy and all that time and like emotional investment that you put in when you can't make the change? So for me, that's kind of been a big issue. That being said, I had a positive experience because it's really easy to talk about the negatives, and they are the first thing that people come up with because there's so much of it. But you can also make change happen, and that's when you need the right collaboration. So in my current workspace, we didn't have a proper ablution area. We had like a prayer space, but as a Muslim, you've got to wash your hands and your feet and your face 5 times a day. And I was using the showers that they use for the people who cycle in and stuff. It was messy, it was unsafe, it was really unfit for purpose. And I just raised it with our facilities manager. But the way I approached it, I look back and I think I should have taken up more space. I came prepared with like options. I had a small, low-cost solution that I fully expected them to choose. It was a fraction of the price. And then I kind of, to show that they should choose that option, because I could have wanted a lot more and had this really comprehensive long-term option that would have really been the best option. I positioned the smaller one as like, we don't want to be a burden. Look, we could ask for this, but I'm only asking for this small piece. Could you make that happen? But I gave them visibility of what good looked like, and to their credit, they chose a better long-term solution. And it's been a huge improvement, not just for me, but for others. And I think my approach of trying to show them I don't want to be a burden, I don't want to take up much space, but I just needed to take up that space for them to see it. That really highlighted the difference, that when change is local, tangible, and you engage with the right person, and maybe it's not a huge budget and it's not systemic change, things can happen. But systemic issues like retention, career progression, pay progression, culture, there's a lot of hierarchies, there's competing priorities, there's lack of accountability. And at the end of the day, in a corporate world, money talks. It's all about the bottom line. It's all about the business case. And I think that once you start understanding that, it can feel a bit deflating because you're trying to make a change, but you have no responsibility to make that difference.
It's interesting to hear that the thing that both of you said, Zainab and Aisha, is that diversity and inclusion is seen as a luxury by corporations. It's like when there's redundancies, when costs go up, it's the first thing that gets cut. And for us, it's not, right? We like wake up every day. It's a fundamental part of who we are. So what I would like to ask as a final question is, if you had to choose a stage or a platform where we could have this discussion, where would it be and who needs to hear it?
So if I could choose a stage, it would be somewhere like the World Cup final. Halftime or right before penalties, when the entire world is watching, fully present, they're at the edge of their seat. People are listening, they're emotionally invested, they just can't look away, because that's the scale and tension this conversation deserves. It's not about the global stage, though. It's about the right spaces. This conversation needs to be in like every boardroom. It needs to be in every leadership team, every decision-making space, but primarily where minorities are present. Because I can guarantee you, if you're in a space where there is at least 1 or 2 women, that conversation about inclusion, intersectionality, it's already happening. Women are already doing that work. The real gap is in the silences. It's where the women's experiences aren't like represented, or where women feel like they have to silence themselves to fit in. It needs to land in those spaces. What would our workplaces look like if they were designed by women? If they were thought about from the start? We're engineers, we talk about designing and thinking about things and requirements. What if these spaces weren't retrofitted, but they were actually discussed? And this book I talk about all the time, but it's that Invisible Woman by Caroline Criado Perez. And it talks about data and how the world is built around a default male. And it's a book that I put up and put down because I can't sit and read it in a whole sitting without getting completely angry at everything around me. I think we need to talk about it everywhere and anywhere, but in places where you can have accountability, not just visibility, where the decisions are being made, where people can shape culture, design systems, and actually make decisions, not just places like here for people who are impacted but maybe have no power.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You've literally said everything. I think the key thing is that it's just this thing of the people who already care about the panel are going to be at the panel, but not the person that doesn't care. And the idea is to get people that don't care to care. Um, and it's such a good, um, I guess, analogy with our jobs as engineers having to like gather requirements to design something. Um, and we see it all the time in engineering that we don't always get it right. And so unfortunately we do have to retrofit it, but it does mean we need to iterate what institutions look like. And I think it's important that, I guess, like company frameworks, like constitutions have this built in so that they are held to account to actually make companies as inclusive. Like there's no change that should be done or nothing that should be done without thinking about whether or not it's inclusive or not, if I'm being perfectly honest. So I would say that, whether it's like especially in places that have high blast radius, World Cup is a great example, whether it's in manager, when you look at like a company framework, I think the line of leadership that have the widest radius is like manager level. And so there needs to be like improved manager training. One thing I actually found a lot in Accenture especially, and I've seen it a bit in my current company, which is a bit smaller, but it's interesting, it's a similar vibe, is that um, you'd run all of these D&I events across different networks, and you'll always see like, I guess, a director attending these events. But there's so many like people's lives that a director is going to have direct impact day to day on. So they're going to these events, they're learning about people's experiences, they're gaining that kind of sympathy and empathy for the people that are sharing their stories on these panels. But the everyday manager, middle management, they're not really there. And I think if you want to improve things for the majority of people, I think there needs to be an emphasis on manager training. I actually think that needs to be a policy, period, because I think it's not every manager that gets made manager because they have the skill set. It's usually seen as a reward for being a great individual contributor. Whereas being a manager itself is a specific role, and I think it involves there's a pastoral element as well as delivery. You're responsible for the development and enablement and performance of other people. So you need to be trained to be able to tackle any type of person and understand how people can be different and how to support them to be their best selves. Like, why is that not a thing that companies invest in? Because you're going to get a lot more out of the company and more of the company if the people with the greatest impact. If you have if you have managers and they have like 5 reportees or 8 reportees and they're all well trained to be able to manage them regardless of the differences that people have, then you're gonna have better performance, you're gonna have better retention, because there's that saying, people always leave a job. No, they don't leave a job, they leave their manager, right? I think that's a saying for a reason. So yeah, I think the conversation needs to be had with people that have the power, and they need to be forced to have it, unfortunately, because otherwise there's not going to be any change.
I've been just floored by both of your experiences and comments on this issue, and I think this discussion has been a really, really amazing. So thank you both so much for your time, and I hope that we will, do a similar discussion later, because you've both said it. We could talk about this for hours and hours, and I'm just really looking forward to doing that again.